Hello, and welcome to the first week of BF35 Textile and Non-Textile Analysis. Today we're going to look at fibers and textile materials, but also just what is a textile, what are they used for, and this will be sort of our introductory course in this course, introductory lesson in this course. Sorry about that. This week we're going to learn what is a textile. What are the main textile fibers and materials that are used to create textiles? Where do these materials and fibers come from? What are their main properties of these fibers and materials? And what are some rare sources of fibers and materials? So this is meant as sort of a broad introductory video aimed at sort of a general knowledge of our fibers and textile materials. First, we'll begin with what is a textile. Now, many of you are familiar with textiles, of course. It is hard not to be, as they are around us in our everyday life. It is hard to spend a single day without the use of textiles. But what are in our family of textiles? Well, a textile is any flat, flexible material used to create clothing, upholstery, or other goods. Usually textiles are created by knitting or weaving of yarns, but they can be used created with alternative uses as well. So what are textiles used for? So textiles are most often associated with fashion design or interior design, and here we have examples of that. So textiles are used in fashion to create clothing, as well as accessories such as hats, shoes, bags, scarves, gloves, any number of things. But they're also widely used in interior design as well. And they're used as drapery or as upholstery fabrics. So if we look at, chairs or couches, they're often covered in upholstery fabrics or textiles. They're used in drapery, shower curtains, rugs, blankets, bedding, pillowcases, any number of different things. They're even sometimes used as wallpaper fabrics. Not often used anymore, but it was once popular to use fabrics as a sort of wallpaper. However, it doesn't end there. Textiles are used for so many things in this world outside of fashion and interior designs. And these are just some examples of the wide-ranging use of textiles. We have sails for sailboats, awnings for architectural structures, the fabric used in hot air balloons and parachutes, for tents, which is also structural. They're used for packaging. So this is a burlap sack. Much coffee utilizes burlap sacks, as other products use burlap sacks or other types of fabrics or textiles to be transported in. Also, there are medical uses for textiles. These are ace bandages. Other sort of gauzes are used for bandages as well. They're also used in cooking. The upper right-hand photo here shows the cheese making process, in which textiles are used to strain the curds from the whey in order to make cheese. And these are just some examples. The use of textiles is really unlimited. So let's get into it. We're going to take a look now at the most common materials and some rarer materials that textiles are made from. I'm going to go in a roughly chronological order, starting with fur. So the first material humans used for clothing was animal hide. This was long before the technologies of weaving or knitting was invented. And we don't know, because this happened so long ago, there's really no way of knowing, why people started to wear animals, their hides, as clothing. Now, it's widely speculated that it was used for warmth or protection from the elements or armor to go to war or any of the other beneficial properties that we get from wearing clothing. However, I think, and of course, there's no way to know who's right or wrong, but this is just my opinion, that the first person to wear any sort of animal hide didn't do it for warmth or for protection or anything like that. They did it for a much more, let's say, human reason, for style. Now, you can imagine how proud someone was when they were killed an animal. It showed that they were a successful hunter, and that was very important property in the early days of man. And how was that sort of best communicated? Well, they killed that animal, skinned it, and wore the hide. That was a story they were telling to everyone that laid eyes on them, without even having to open their mouths to tell the tale. It's very likely that the first person, I guess the inventor of clothing, shall we say, simply did it to brag. To say, look at me, I am a great hunter, look what I killed. And that carries in today. We're not going to get into all the psychological reasons for style and fashion today, or really in this course. But as someone very interested in fashion, and we'll go into it more in other courses in the fashion design program, psychology plays a big, important role in what we wear and why we decide to wear it. So one of the most important psychological factors, probably of early man, or one of the most important things to communicate via clothing was, hey, I'm tough, I'm a good hunter, I'm a survivor. I'm not afraid of those lions or whatever they may be. I killed one. And that whole story was played out when they decided to wear that piece of clothing. So, as far as we know, the first textile man used was fur. It's the easiest to create. It is a direct result of hunting. We do not eat the fur of animals, so it was left over, and so not to be put to waste, was probably worn by man. Again, we don't know why he decided to do it, or she, for that matter, but it is undisputable that fur was the first textile used by humans. This is a more modern but still rather vintage photograph of a furrier. A furrier is someone who prepares or deals in furs. And this photograph is a furrier from Denmark in 1945. Now, when we refer to fur, it is the skin of animals with the fur still on it. Historically, fur has been a very important textile in pretty much every single culture around the world. And these are some historical depictions of fur being used by different cultures. In the bottom left, we have an Arapaho woman wearing a buffalo robe, circa 1879. You see it being draped over her shoulder here. Here, of course, is an Inuit woman in a fur parka, and as it would be imaginable, fur is a much more and much more readily seen in cultures from cold climates than it is from warm climates. But of course, even in warm climates, it is represented in those cultures. As we see down here, a young Zulu warrior is wearing a leopard skin. At this time, only royal family members of the Zulu tribe were allowed to wear this hide. So he was probably a prince or someone of great importance. I don't know who. I couldn't find out who exactly it was. But the fact that he has that leopard skin, and the fact that his photograph was being taken at a time when not a lot of photographs were being taken, shows us that he was probably a person of great importance. And here we have two depictions of Russians from about the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century, a girl trimmed in fur and a man in a wolf fur coat. So here are some historical representations of fur, and again, it's found in almost every culture around the world. There are two ways that we get fur. Of course, it's always from an animal, which is killed and then skinned for its fur. But there are two ways that that can happen. The first is that those animals are trapped from the wild. Now, this is a modern day Trappers Association convention, which is set up between, it's set up in Manitoba, which is in Canada, and on the right are the fur trappers who've gone out in the wild and caught and skinned animals. Here are quality assessors that are going over the different hides and assessing their value and quality to be graded and then connected with buyers that will then produce fur garments from these hides. The other way we get fur is from farms. So this is an American mink farmer in which fur animals are bred in captivity for their fur to be harvested, so they are not trapped from the wild. Now, we can harvest the fur and make fur garments and use fur as a textile from really any animal with fur. However, there are some more common animals that are used for fur, and they are here. Starting on the left, we have a mink, which is a small weasel-like animal. Rabbit is also very popular. Chinchilla, which is considered one of the softest furred animals. The fur from the chinchilla makes wildly expensive but very nice fur for jackets. Foxes, sables, which is very much like a mink. They are indeed in the same family, very close to the weasel, otter, and raccoon. Now, I'm not going to get into the ethics of harvesting animals for fur. We are all open to having our own beliefs on the subject. Of course, in modern day, there has been a lot of outrage behind the harvesting of animals for fur because indeed they do have to sacrifice their lives. We'll get more into the ethics of it when we get into our chapter of fur and leather. But everyone here is allowed to hold their own beliefs. If you are against fur, that is perfectly fine. But again, I'm just relaying information on what is a historic textile and fur. And again, it is not quite as utilized in the past as it was today due to the rise of alternate textiles that have taken the place of fur, that are cheaper, easier to care for and use, and also don't take the lives of animals, which again many people object to, and rightfully so. Many times the skinning process, when not done humanely, is quite gruesome. But there are still many countries, especially colder countries, that utilize fur as a textile quite readily because it has a lot of great advantages. And again, not only has fur trade, come into ethical question because of its cruelty to animals, but historically has had very detrimental impacts on wild populations of animals. So the wild populations of sea otters and beavers, particularly of note, were driven almost to extinction by the fur trade. So without proper regulation, trapping from the wild can be quite detrimental to wild populations of animals. There are now in place many fur regulations that prohibit the harvesting of fur from critically threatened or endangered species. Very popular, maybe 100 years ago, of course, was harvesting the fur from big cats, tigers, and leopards. They're particularly gorgeous coats made particularly gorgeous fur coats. However, those animals are quite threatened, near in danger, near extinction. So there are some very, very strict regulations against the harvesting of those animals for fur, and rightfully so. We still see fur today. Here we have one more sort of vintage depiction. That would be, that's a snow leopard, which is very much protected today. But as I was mentioning just previously, those sorts of coats, very beautiful, were very popular in the 50s and earlier to make fur coats. But the rest of these are more modern versions of coats. Now, it can be hard to tell sometimes the animal being used because animal fur can be dyed, although the natural coloring is often used. This lady here is wearing a chinchilla coat, which usually you can tell because it has this sort of white, gray, black blend, and sort of these poofy lines. The animal itself is rather small, so we see these smaller patches together. Down here looks to be about a fox. I'm not quite sure what this is, and I'm not quite sure what this is either. This one has been cut. Looks to be probably fox as well. And here we see sort of the typical uses of fur. It's typically used in outerwear as jackets and so on in modern times. The properties of fur are that it comes from an animal which is killed in the harvesting process. It is very expensive. It is very difficult to use. It needs specialty machines and specialty industrial processes to be able to sew. So a normal seamstress typically isn't capable of dealing with fur. That's why you need to, that's why furriers exist. They are specialty craftspeople with the machines, tools, and ability to work with fur, which is really seen as its own sort of set of skills apart from your normal garment making. It's difficult to care for. You can't just throw this stuff in the wash. Many times you need special storage for your fur garments. It needs to be dry cleaned only, and then is still very expensive to do so. Benefits of fur is that it's incredibly warm. It's hard to find any other alternative fabric that has the insulative and warmth properties of fur. This is why it has been so beloved and utilized by many, many cultures in cold climates. It really has given the ability for humans to live in cold climates more so than any other sort of textile. Now, if it is cared for well, it is durable, incredibly durable. So much so that a well cared for and well made fur coat can be passed down through generations. Part 2, leather, sort of a counterpart to fur. And leather can really be thought of as very much akin to fur, just simply it is still the skin of an animal, whereas fur again is the skin of an animal with the fur. Leather is the skin of the animal without the fur. So leather is incredibly old, as are most of our textiles, but even older than our natural fibers. Anything woven probably came into existence after fur because additional processing is needed to sort of scrape and tan the hide. It's not quite as sort of ready set, I guess, as fur, although fur does need its own processing. But these are some incredibly ancient bone tools that are thought to be used to process animal skins for the creation of leather. And they were found in a cave in Morocco. Now, keeping with the ancient history of leather, this is a tannery. So once a animal has been skinned, the skin must be processed in sort of vats of different chemicals and dyes to create a usable textile. Now this is the tannery in Fez, Morocco, and it is the oldest tannery still in operation today, believe it or not. And it is, I'm not quite, you can probably Google it, but it's very, very old. And again, it's still in operation today. So this gives you sort of a look at how ancient tanneries would look like. And we see all the different vats here are soaking different leathers for different finishes and different colors. Now it looks quite pretty. There's some actually very beautiful photographs of this tannery with all the sort of different colors and dyes. But I'll tell you what, I've been here and it smells very bad. They actually give you, if you want to tour it, a nice little sprig of mint to hold to your nose to help combat the terrible smell. Now the smell comes from the chemicals used in here, and a lot of them have the compound urea in it, which is found in urine. So that, along with the other sort of chemicals out baking in the hot Moroccan sun, leaves for a very interesting visual picture, but not a very good smell. Along with our ancient leather uses, this is the oldest leather shoe, complete with leather laces, and it dates to about 3500 BC and comes from Armenia. Now this is what a modern tannery looks like, a bit different than our Moroccan counterpart. And these big vats have taken the place of the smaller vats shown in the previous image of the tannery. But the process is fairly similar. Hides are in here being soaked in different chemicals to treat them and process them into a usable textile. And this is a textile tanning facility owned by KTM Leathers in Pakistan. So where do we get leather? So leather really comes as a byproduct of the meat industry. So whereas this is where it's a little bit different from fur. So the fur animals we use don't really have a high consumption or other product value. They are raised, trapped specifically for their fur, although of course we do sometimes eat things like rabbits and so on. However, most of our leather, the vast majority of our leather, comes as a byproduct from our meat industries. So, as you can probably assume, the vast majority of leather that you're going to find out in the marketplace come from cattle. And once the animal is harvested for its meat, for its beef, we certainly don't want to be wasteful. Its skin goes to be tanned and comes to leather. And we will often see the prices of leather rise and fall along with the prices of beef. So the price of beef goes up, the price of leather goes up. The price of beef goes down, leather goes down. So I also have sheep and goat here, which are also very common animals that are used for meat, that are harvested for their meat. Not quite as much as cattle, especially here in America. Cattle is definitely the number one animal harvested for meat, except for chickens, but we don't really use chickens for leather. Their skin isn't as good for leather, but typically around the world, these three are going to be the biggest producers of leather, goat, sheep, and cattle. And that's simply because they're eaten for their meat. Now we can make leather out of many, many different things. Really anything with a skin can be used to make a leather out of it. But I'm not going to get into specialty leathers in this lecture. We'll save that for our module that is going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into furs and leathers. So where do we see leather? We see leather all over the place. So in fashion, we see it to use leather gloves, mainly a lot of times in the accessories industry. So that's why we have a lot of accessories here: belts, bags, wallets, shoes, gloves, all very common items made from leather. Also the iconic leather jacket, but we can also see garments like leather pants, leather bustiers, and things like that. It's also good to note that outside of fashion, leather is very often used. It is very, very durable. So we're going to see it, with equestrian uses. So things like saddles are often always used. Leather is almost always used just because of its strong, durable nature. It's also a very common upholstery fabric, again, because of its durable nature. So we really see leather all over the place. And again, very strong, a little bit stretchy. Oh, let's get to the properties of leathers. It comes from an animal which is killed in the harvesting process. It is expensive. It is difficult to use. So similar to fur, it typically needs a machine specific for leather sewing, a leather machine. Although there are thinner, softer types of leather that can be sewn on a normal sewing machine. Just be careful, use a big needle and test first. It's difficult to care for, just like with fur. It's not machine washable. It needs to be polished, sometimes oiled to maintain softness. It's very warm. It's very durable if well cared for. Again, can be passed down through generations. And really, if you need something that is soft, flexible, but very, very strong, it's really hard to beat leather. The surfaces can also be treated to achieve different textures and patterns. So when we see something, if you go to a store and see a bag that looks like it might be a crocodile skin or something like that, a crocodile leather, most times it is not. It is cow leather, again, our most common leather that we see, and the top has been embossed to look like crocodile leather. And we'll get that into those sorts of processes in the leather module, but also in our finishings module. Part 3, linen. Now, linen is amongst our oldest fibers, and now we are sort of evolving from animal hides, which just need a sort of base level of tanning, into our fibered materials, which come from a fibrous material that need to be spun into a yarn, and then those yarns are either woven or knitted into a textile. Now, this requires more advanced technological evolution. First, it requires agriculture. So when we see things, fibers coming from linen, or our next fiber, which is cotton, these are coming from plants. But in order to get the amount of plant necessary to start making textiles, you need to have an agricultural system in place. Not only do you need that, but you need the technology to first harvest the fibers, then spin the fibers into yarn, and then weave the fibers into a fabric or textile. So once we're getting here, this is something that we see much further on in man's civilization. And we don't know exactly who was the first peoples to really invent yarns or fibers. It's quite old, and we've seen some very ancient depictions of fabric and use of fabric. It is quite old, but again, it is more modern than animal hides, where we just sort of need to kill an animal and skin it, maybe smoke the hide a little bit to sort of process it. Here we need agricultural systems, we need yarn technologies, and we need weaving technologies. So it's a fairly advanced stage for humans to be at before we get to our textiles that use fibers. Here on the image, since we're on linen, on the left it shows an ancient Egyptian mural depicting flax cultivation. So the ancient Egyptians were widely regarded as the first peoples to cultivate the flax plant and use it for linen. Linen was a very important fiber for the ancient Egyptians, and when we get to the properties of linen, you'll probably see why. It's very cool and breathable and light in a desert climate. But linen comes from the flax plant, which is shown here. Where we get the actual fibers to create linen is in the stem of the actual flax plant. It creates these lovely blue little flowers, but we don't get it from the flowers or the seeds. We get it from the actual stem. What we do is we harvest the full plant, we let the full plant dry, and then we beat the stems. A sort of pulpy mash will kind of leak away, and these sort of hairy fibrous parts of the stem will be left. Those are cleaned, processed, then spun into yarns for the eventual production of linen fabrics. This is the oldest woven garment that still exists today. It's a linen garment, no doubt, owing, to the ancient nature of linen. It's called the Tarkan dress and dates between 5100 and 5500 years old. And it originates from the dawn of the Egyptian Empire. This is a modern day flax farm in North Dakota. And you can see all those lovely little blue flowers in bloom. Flax farm's really lovely to look at. Very, very pretty, lovely little flower. This is a modern linen factory, also in America, taking those linen yarns and weaving linen fabrics. Here's some garments that we associate with linen fiber. It is often woven. It can be knit, although you typically don't see it as a knit. You typically see it as a woven, although it can be, like I said. We'll see it used in suits, pants and shirts, linen suits for summer, of course, and sort of lightweight, typically sort of more lighter pastel colors linen will be dyed in, or stays in its sort of natural color, which is sort of a tan color. So what are the properties of linen? So it comes from the flax plant, and we do kill the plant in its harvesting, so it's moderate in price, it's very lightweight, it wrinkles quite easily. It's very cool, again, probably why it was loved so much by the ancient Egyptians. It was a very hot climate, but linen breathes and wicks moisture away from the body, which makes it an excellent summer fabric. It has antibacterial properties as well. So it has been shown in labs that a few types of harmful bacteria strains have a very difficult time staying alive on linen. So pretty neat. And it can handle machine wash and high heat. Next we have cotton. Cotton also comes from a plant. This is a botanical drawing of the cotton plant, which shows all parts of it: the flower, leaves, and the seed pod. Now, that's where we get the fibers. We get it from the seed pod. Once the flower blooms, it gets pollinized and creates seeds. It will close up again. This is its process of sort of closing up again. A seed pod will harden around it, and then when ripe, the seeds are ripe, will open up again. Now these seed pods are called bolls, so bolls of cotton, and the seeds are attached to this sort of fluffy material that's meant to sort of get caught in the wind or get caught on different things, and it's a method of seed dispersal. Much like if you look at a dandelion, it flowers, it closes up, and then it opens up again with this sort of fluffy strands attached to the seeds that blow off in the wind. So it's very similar to that, except this is much more conducive to making fiber than a dandelion. Although it's widely believed that cultivation of cotton began in the area of India and Pakistan, many ancient examples of cotton have been found all over the world, including Central and South America. The oldest known cotton fabric dyed with indigo, shown here, was found in an excavation site in Huaca, Peru. It's a 6,200-year-old precursor to denim. So why do I say it's a precursor of denim? Well, denim is one of our more popular cotton fabrics, and it's dyed with indigo. Indigo being a blue dye from a plant. So that sort of blue associated with denim is an indigo dye. So this is cotton dyed with indigo. It doesn't have that twill weave that we associate with denim, but again, it's a precursor, so pretty close still, and pretty old as well. So this is an American cotton farm. America is a large producer of cotton, as well as the Middle East is known for very fine types of cotton. And here you can see the actual bolls of cotton that are open. The little fluffy seed pods are ready to be harvested. This is a factory that spins cotton into yarn in Dhaka, Bangladesh. This is a factory floor full of looms creating woven cotton cloth, and this is owned by Dawood Usman Textiles in Pakistan. Now, cottons can be woven as seen in the previous, but it's also very, very common to see knit cotton, and this is a circular knitting factory in Khartoum, Sudan. Here we see garments that are often associated with the cotton fiber. Again, we see cotton knit as much as we do see it woven. So over here we have our cotton knits. Now if you're a little bit uncomfortable with, well, what's a knit and what's a woven, just sit tight. We're going to get to that very, very soon. But here we have our cotton knits, which t-shirts, socks, underwear, sweatpants, hoodies, often made from cotton knits. Cotton wovens, of course, jeans. Jean made from cotton is made from cotton. It's woven. But also collared shirts, dresses, khaki shorts, chinos, all made from cotton. What are the properties of cotton? It comes from the cotton plant, which doesn't need to be killed in the harvesting process, but it is. It's inexpensive in price. It's our least expensive of our natural fibers. The only thing that's less expensive than cotton are some of our synthetic fibers. It's very lightweight, it's easy to sew, it's cool, it breathes and wicks moisture, so also makes it a very excellent summer fabric, and very absorbent, so this is why we also see towels and bathrobes made out of cotton. It takes dye and prints very well, so it's very easy to dye, very easy to print on it. It can handle machine wash and high heat if pre-shrunk. So cotton is prone to shrinking. However, most cottons that you will get today are what's called pre-shrunk. So they've already gone through the process of applying high heat to shrink itself. So it will no longer shrink. This is more common previously in years past. If you bought a cotton garment, you would have to get it maybe a size larger because first time you go through the wash, it will shrink. But again, most of our garments today are made out of pre-shrunk cotton, so you don't have to really worry about that anymore. However, if you are buying cotton from some textile outlets or a fabric store to make, you might want to pre-shrink it yourself. I have definitely made a couple garments where I forgot to pre-shrink the cotton and put it through the wash, and it came out a miniature version of itself, which was adorable but no longer wearable. I'll also mention that cotton is probably the most widely used fiber for textiles today. Next is wool. Now, wool can come from a variety of different species. However, I'm just going to talk about wool from sheep, which is where the vast majority of our wool comes from. Just like with leather and fur, there are some alternate sources of specialty wools, but I'm not going to get into that. We're going to get into that further in our wool module. This is a picture of a merino sheep from Australia, which is the world's leader in wool production. And merino sheep are a particular species of sheep that are prized for their wool production. They not only create a lot of wool, so grow a big furry coat, but merino wool is really known for being quite smooth and soft, whereas other wool can be a bit scratchy and itchy. But merino, very fine, very soft, lovely to have against the skin. They're so cute, aren't they? Wool, just like its plant counterparts, is an ancient fiber. We don't exactly know where it first originated, but probably somewhere in Europe, and probably somewhere in colder climates, because unlike our cotton and our flax for linen, which is quite cool, it wicks moisture, it's easy breezy, wool is quite warm. So you need it for your colder climates where cotton and linen are not going to be as suitable. And these are just some depictions of ancient wool. On the left, we have wool garments worn by ancient Minoans. In the center, we have a statue of the goddess Minerva wearing an ancient Grecian peplos, which was usually made from wool. And this statue was carved by Myron in the 5th century BC, and you can see it in the St. Raymond Museum in France if you would like to. On the right, we have a Sumerian noble couple wearing wool garments, and the illustration is depicting clothing that Sumerians would be wearing circa 2500 BC. Now, when we harvest wool from sheep, we shear it, which means we pretty much just give the sheep a haircut. The sheep is not harmed in the process of wool harvesting. And I really would like to make this note because I've gotten a lot of students with ethical concerns about using fur or leather. They don't want animals to be harmed in the harvesting of fiber. However, sheep are not harmed in the harvesting of their wool. What happens is normally, like with any animal, they will shed their fur to keep it at a level that's manageable for them. However, sheep are a domesticated version, and domesticated primarily for their wool. So they have lost the ability to shed their fur. This means that it will continually grow and grow and grow if not shorn by human intervention. This also means that if you were to stop shearing sheep, their health would deteriorate to the point of death. Their wool is very, very warm, and it's very, very cumbersome. So what we do is over the winter, the sheep grow their woolly coats to keep warm, and then in the springtime, when the weather starts to turn warm, the sheep are shorn. And when done properly, the sheep are very excited to get their haircuts because they're quite uncomfortable. Imagine how nice it is when you take off your winter coat to go out on a nice summer day. Well, the sheep can't take off their winter coats without the help of humans. So I just want to make this point that without humans harvesting the wool from sheep would die. So if you want to make ethical decisions about what you wear, just make sure that they're informed decisions. Now here we see a carding machine. So once the wool has been shorn from the sheep, it goes through a processing which will clean the wool, dye the wool, and spin it into yarn. And here we see a yarn dyeing and processing machine in a factory in the Jameson Mill in Sandnes, Scotland. Scotland and Ireland in general are also very well known for their wool production, very fine wool in Ireland and in all of England really, but Scotland particularly. And here we see an American woolen company with looms to weave yarn. Now, just like cotton, wool can be woven or knit, and we very often see both textiles, woven knit wool as well as knit wool. And here we see a factory in Connecticut weaving wool, and here we have a another factory in Scotland knitting wool. So what are the garments that we typically see in wool? Well, up top we have our knit woolen garments. So sweaters, winter accessories like mittens and hats and scarves often are woolen knits. Our woven accessories, or woven wools, are down here. We typically will see wools in suit jackets, in overcoats, in outerwear, as well as suits. The traditional fabric for a man's suit is wool. It's just a very fine wool that has been spun finely into a fine yarn and then woven finely into a thinner fabric, and then created into the suit. And here we have a sort of cultural, historical woolen use here, the Scottish kilt. Again, very important to the cultural heritage of the Scottish was their wool production as well as their wool fabrics. Proper properties of wool. So again, it comes from the shorn fur of an animal in which the animal is not harmed in this process. In fact, many times it is beneficial to the animal to have their wool shorn. It's expensive. It's very warm and insulating. With the exception of fur, it is our most warm and most insulating material, textile material. It's difficult to care for though. It's often not machine washable. It can be tricky, it can pill, it can shrink. It doesn't take heat well, although it can be shaped with heat. And again, we'll get more into that in our deep dive on wool. But it is very durable if it's cared for properly. It has anti-wrinkle properties, but it doesn't take dye or prints well. So traditionally, you couldn't really get a lot of different colors out of your wool. However, different chemical processes have gotten our dyes better. We've got better processes, better chemical processes, better dyes. So it's not as big of an issue, but say 70 years ago, if you wanted, a hot pink wool, that was pretty much not possible. And typically you see a little bit more moderate colors being used in wool fibers. Not always, but again, it's just a little bit more difficult to get those bright, brilliant colors out of your wool. Next is silk. Now silk is unique because it's one of our only major fibers, our only major fiber that comes from an insect. And it comes from the silk moth. This is the life cycle of the silkworm. It's not really a worm, it's a caterpillar, which is the larval state of the silk moth, which is pictured here. Now the silk moth used for actual silk is rather dull. He's just sort of a white little moth. But there are wild species of silk moths that are quite beautiful, and we have some around here. So if you want to do a little Google deep dive, look up some pictures of some nice moths. There's many species of wild silk moths that are really quite beautiful. So what happens is the moth lays these little eggs on a mulberry tree. Now this is the leaf of the mulberry tree, and it's very important because it is the only food that is eaten by the little silkworm, or silk caterpillar, I should say. So for the cultivation of silk, you need not only the little insects, but you need mulberry trees. Very important, again, because if they don't have anything to eat, they will die off and they will never get to the cocoon stage. So we all know the process that caterpillars go through. They hatch from an egg, they feed as a kind of worm-like caterpillar. Then when they get fat enough, they create this little cocoon made out of silk strands. And then after a period of time, they metamorphosize into their adult form, which is the moth. So same as butterflies. But what we do is we harvest the little cocoons and we drop them into boiling water, and it unravels the silk fibers used to create the cocoon, and then we can harvest those fibers to create silk. The silkworm is killed in the process. Now, the origins of most of our fibers are somewhat nebulous and unclear, but not silk. Silk actually has a fun little origin story. Now, I don't know if it's true, but it's fun, and I'm going to tell it to you. We do know for a fact that the sort of brains and inventor of not only how to harvest silkworm fibers, but also the inventor of how to spin it into yarn, and the creator of the first loom. So, pretty impressive. was the Empress Lei Tzu, who was the wife of the Yellow Emperor Huangdi. Now, sorry, I pronounced both of those things terribly incorrectly. Please forgive me. The legend has it, origin story, that this empress was having a lovely hot cup of tea out in her garden, sitting under the nice shade of a mulberry tree, most likely, when a silkworm cocoon fell into her hot tea. Now, obviously wanting to remove the cocoon from her tea, because it would be much of a deterrent to enjoyment, she started trying to take out the silkworm cocoon. But it was unraveling, and she started unraveling and unraveling and unraveling until the entire garden was, strung out with these silkworm fibers. I don't know if that's true, but it's a fun little story. From there, again, she did indeed invent the method of harvesting those silk fibers, figure out how to spin them into yarn, and created a specialty loom just for weaving. That's the origin story, and silk has ever since then been a huge part of Chinese history and culture, creating many ancient garments of just absolute beauty from silk. And here is a depiction, painting of ladies of the court preparing silk fiber down here. Oh, sorry, newly woven, preparing silk. So they're probably wearing silk. It's probably painted on silk. Maybe even they use silk bristles in the brush. Who knows? I don't know. But again, just sort of a continuation of the historical importance of silk. Now let's look at some more modern depictions of our silk cultivation. So here we have the silkworms themselves being cultivated at a silkworm farm in southern India. And here you can see the little wormies munching their mulberry leaves quite happily in these little beds made for them. The ladies are probably picking out the cocoons as they form to be sent to another factory, perhaps this factory. This is a factory in China in which the silkworm cocoons, as you can see them right here, are being dropped into boiling water. Again, that boiling water releases the fibers, loosens the fibers from their cocoon structure, and the fibers are being drawn out by these machines, and then those fibers will be spun into yarn, and then those yarns will go to create lovely silk fabrics. And here we have a modern loom, modern silk loom, creating an ancient fabric, song brocade or brocade, which is a ancient textile from China, which features rich colors, patterns, and embroidery, which you can see down here, the finished product. Well, you can see it here too. Now, just like all the other fabrics, you can also knit silk. Now, woven silks are more common. They're not, you're probably going to see silk in a woven form, but it can be knit. Most notably, you'll see it in silk jerseys, which is a type of knit silk. And here we see a knitting machine knitting silk fabric. Here we see common uses of silk. It's really known as a luxury fabric. Has a beautiful sheen, beautiful drape. So we're going to see it in sort of more formal garments. We're going to see it in dresses. We're going to see it in lovely drapery, as well as, when we see those lovely brocades over here, those lovely dense, rich fabrics here. So formal wear, And again, it's quite expensive, it's quite beautiful. So we see it in dresses. You can see it in other garments such as suits and other things like that. You're not going to see it in less expensive garments, again, because of the price, really for those more formal wears. Oh, I'm sorry. So what are our properties of silk? So silk comes from the cocoon of the silk moth larva. The insect is killed in the harvesting process. It's expensive. It has a gorgeous sheen, so that sort of shininess and drape. Flows very nicely, shines very nicely. It's very difficult to care for though, and it's often not machine washable. It's durable if cared for properly. It has anti-wrinkle properties. It takes dye and prints well. So again, as we see, those very bright, brilliant colors associated with silks, because that it dyes very, very easily and takes those colors very, very well. So even with ancient natural dyes, we still see bright, beautiful silks. It can be very difficult to sew, especially the shiny varieties, which are quite slippery. Synthetics. Synthetic fibers. So synthetic fibers are not made from natural sources. They're made as derivatives of petroleum, coal, and natural gas. And there are a number of different types of synthetic fibers. Here's an overview of some of the more common synthetic fibers that we'll take a little bit of a closer look at each one. There's nylon, which is very durable, the most durable of man-made fibers, and is extremely lightweight. There's polyester, which is the most widely used man-made fiber, and we'll see polyester as a very cheap alternative to our natural fibers, and we'll see it often blended with cotton and other natural fibers to decrease the price of those fabrics. Acrylic provides warmth from a lightweight, soft, and resilient fiber. Spandex has elastic properties, which we'll talk about more in the elastic spandex slide. And there's also rayon, which is a chemically altered cellulose. It's soft, lustrous, and versatile. So this is synthetic fibers being spun into a yarn. They're being extruded out after their chemical processes. So I just want to say, so synthetic fibers, actually let's get into it in the next slide. So how do we make synthetic fibers? So synthetic fibers are plastics. They're a form of plastic. So their creation is very similar to any other form of plastic. It needs petroleum, limestone, water, acetylene, something like that. A chemical compound used as a bonding agent, natural gas, and coal. So just like any other plastic, there's some iffy ingredients going into our synthetic fibers. And again, it is a plastic, so it does not break down easily. It's a landfill filler, and again, has all of the properties from plastic. So it can be found in our oceans, and can be durable because it doesn't break down, which is a benefit and also a detriment. But again, think of it as a plastic. So who invented synthetic fibers? Well, it actually was, the roots of synthetic fibers comes way before actual plastics, because we can also create synthetic fibers from cellulose, which is a liquid extracted from plants. And there are still some synthetic fibers today that make use of cellulose instead of just straight plastics, but they still sort of blend the materials of cellulose with other sort of plastic materials to create the synthetic fibers. And the first synthetic material or fiber was created by this guy right here, Joseph Swan, an English chemist. And he first, again, created a synthetic fiber in the 1880s. So let's take a look at some of our synthetic fibers. Over here we have nylon. So nylon, oops, sorry about that. Let's go back. So nylon is most often used in ropes because it's very, very strong. In fashion, we're typically going to see it in stockings. So this is a extreme close-up of nylon stockings. We can see the knit nylon in the stocking. So nylon is a synthetic thermoplastic polymer, and it was first developed by DuPont, an American chemical corporation, in the mid-1930s. Now DuPont is actually, you're going to see that name a lot because it's an American chemical corporation that is responsible for most of our modern synthetic fibers. It was first sold commercially as bristles for toothbrushes, but appeared in women's stockings not long after. Before nylon, stockings were made out of silk and had to have a seam down the back. And come around World War II, the huge rage was nylon stockings, which were invented but rare because most of the nylon production was going to the production of parachutes for the war. But we were able to get those nylon stockings without the seam, and they were very, very popular according to my grandma. Next we have acrylic. Now, like many synthetic fibers, it's used as a wool substitute. So this is something that we're going to see a lot, where we have an expensive natural fiber and then a synthetic fiber that tries to mimic the properties of the natural fiber as a cheaper alternative. Now, acrylic is that alternative for wool. In feel, it's very similar. However, in durability and warmth, it doesn't come anywhere near. Most yarn produced now for hobbyist knitters is acrylic, which me as a hobbyist knitter is, I don't really like acrylic. I find it itchy to the skin, and I like, when I make something, I usually make hats or gloves or scarves, and I want them to be warm, so I like to use real wool. Acrylic is another polymer created by DuPont in 1941, although it wasn't produced in large quantities until the 1950s. But again, you're going to see this hobby yarn, cheap sweaters. Any type of cheap sweater is probably going to be made out of acrylic. It's also used in, cheaper things that you might associate with wool, so scarves and mittens and hats and things like that. Although in my opinion, spring for the wool, you'll be warmer. Over here is rayon. Now rayon is our oldest synthetic fiber that is widely used. And it's created from cellulose, an organic compound extracted from tree bark, leaves, and wood. Although the process of actually creating the fiber uses cellulose, many of the other ingredients mimic the plastic production's ingredients as the other synthetic fibers. It can be used as a substitute for cotton or wool. However, it's most used as imitation silk. And it's been around since the early 1900s. Here you can see a rayon fiber in the synthetic fiber form. Here are the yarns and some rayon fabrics over here. Has a lovely sort of drape, just like wool, so it moves quite nicely. It has a nice sheen, as you can see kind of here. So it has that sort of sheen and drape of silk. Very similar to silk, actually. It does a better job imitating silk than I think acrylic does imitating wool. Here's a close-up of rayon being woven. It looks like it's a, I'm not quite sure what weave that is, but some sort of, maybe jacquard. Now acetate is a type of rayon. It's a variety of rayon. And it's often used as a lining fabric. So typically when we're going to see acetate, it's very thin, it's kind of shiny, and very, very cheap. Again, we typically are going to see acetate inside our coats, skirts, and so on, used as a lining fabric. Now viscose is also a rayon variety. It is simply rayon that has been put through an extra chemical process by the same name, the viscose process. It creates a more luxurious feeling textile, and it can be knitted or woven. So viscose is a little bit pricey when compared to our other synthetics, simply because it has this extra process that it has to go through. So more time, more processes, typically equals more expensive. But you know, it's sort of a quote-unquote luxury synthetic. It does feel quite nice. It has a lovely luster. It has, you know, it's a little bit stronger, so on and so forth. So that's what viscose is about. And last we have spandex. Now spandex is an anagram for expands. And it was first created by Joseph Shivers, also a DuPont scientist, and he created it in 1958. Now, spandex really revolutionized many aspects of the fashion and textile world. It's really seen everywhere. It's blended into fabrics to give them stretch. So, before spandex was invented, woven fabrics do not stretch. And even knit fabrics only stretch to a certain amount. So things that we see like leggings, yoga pants, even bras, swimsuits, dresses like this one, wetsuits, they could not exist before the invention of spandex in 1958. And we're sort of out of it now, but really we saw a trend beginning in, you know, sort of, I guess maybe peaking in 2010, you know, the skinny jean and this very, very tight silhouette. It was not possible without spandex. So the whole way, the whole reason a skinny jean could exist was with spandex. So if you look at those pants, if you have some skinny jeans left over from that era, take a look. Jeans are typically made out of cotton, and they're typically made with a twill. Neither of those things stretch in any way. So they don't allow skinny jeans. You couldn't wear them. You couldn't put them on. But most of those skinny jeans have had spandex blended into the fiber profile to allow it to stretch. So it allows that body hugging shape, allows you to wear them, and allows a sort of modicum of comfort while wearing them. But many other things, both, you know, fashionable as well as technical. Sorry, didn't mean to get out of that quite yet. I'll try to stop doing that. Just weren't possible before this invention of spandex. And again, you know, this copolymer dominates active and sportswear markets. They wouldn't exist without this fiber. This is the actual fiber for spandex. Now, don't be confused, because spandex is the common name for this fiber in North America, but it has other names elsewhere. So if you see a fiber known as lycra or elastine or something else like that, it's all the same fiber. It's just made by a different company, so it comes under a different brand name. Properties of synthetics. Comes from the synthetic production of plastic fibers. It's inexpensive in price. Characteristics can widely vary depending on type, and that would be strength or care or shininess or whatever else. It's easy to care for, it's machine washable, takes dye and print well. It's often blended with natural fibers to achieve a desired price or fabric characteristics. Now I'll mention here, because I haven't mentioned it before, that fibers are often blended. Not only synthetic with natural, but natural with natural. So you can get cotton wool blends, you can get wool silk blends, you can get acrylic wool blends, which makes our job identifying fibers in fabrics very difficult. First off, blended fiber fabrics are notoriously difficult to identify because, again, they have different properties of all their different fibers, so it's hard to sort of pinpoint exactly which ones are in it. But it's good for the fashion designer and for the consumer because we can blend fibers to achieve either the price that we want. So if I keep blending in polyester with cotton, I'm going to drive down the price of that fabric while still getting some of the beneficial characteristics of cotton. So you can say, well, why not just have all polyester instead of cotton? Well, polyester doesn't breathe well like cotton does. It doesn't quite feel as nice as well as cotton does. It doesn't wick moisture like cotton does. So if cotton's a little bit too expensive for my customer, I can start blending in a little bit of polyester. Brings down the price, still keeps some of those nice cotton properties in place. So we're not sacrificing too much quality while maintaining a inexpensive price for our customer. It can also be blended for different fabric characteristics. So if I have, I want a stronger fabric, I want a stronger silk, let's say, I can start to blend in nylon with some of the fibers. Or if I want something that is more water resistant or is stretchier, I can start blending in spandex to get a stretchier fabric. I can blend in, a stronger synthetic fiber for a stronger fabric, so on and so forth. Last are our rare fibers. Now these are fibers that you're not going to really see that much, but I thought are neat. I may as well mention them. Now I'm going to focus on rare fibers that don't really fit in other categories. So we're going to go into sort of specialty wools when we go into our deep dive on wools, and we're going to go into, different types of furs and leathers when we do our deep dives on furs and leathers. But these are different fibers that just don't really fit in any of those other categories, but are worth mentioning anyways. One, because maybe they're just interesting. Two, because although they're kind of more on the rarer side, you should be aware of them. The first is bamboo. Now, bamboo has long been used in clothing, but mainly as sort of structural support for garments. But recently, there's been several different chemical processes that have been invented that allow for the softening of bamboo fibers. It allows them to be softened so much that they can be spun into a yarn and then used to make a variety of different textiles. Here we see bamboo over here. Bamboo is actually a type of grass, and it's incredibly fast growing and incredibly common plant throughout the Asian continent. Now, fabrics made from bamboo share similar properties to cotton. They're cool, they wick moisture well, it takes dye pretty well, so on and so forth. Bamboo textiles are sometimes touted as environmentally friendly and sustainable, although that claim is debatable. There certainly are reasons to think that it is quite good as a sustainable fabric source, but you really have to look into what type of chemical process is being used to create the bamboo fibers, as well as let's see the quality of that process. What are they doing with their waste materials, so on and so forth. It certainly has the potential to be incredibly environmentally friendly and sustainable. However, it's not always harvested and processed in a way that would earn it that label. So know your sources. There are now a few different methods, again, to extract the cellulose fiber from bamboo. Again, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. Bamboo is being seen more and more. It is, out of any of these rarer fibers that I'm going to show you, probably the most likely that you're going to come across a bamboo fiber. I've seen it used in the athleisure market most often. So often made into sort of bamboo jerseys, a stretchy type of knit, often used in sort of leggings or sports bras or t-shirts and things like that. And it, again, becoming more and more popular. So maybe it will even within the next decade or so come out of our rare fiber category and settle itself into a own category in its own. The next is hemp or cannabis, and yep, it's the stuff that you smoke, but the plant that is bred specifically for fiber cultivation doesn't really have any THC, so probably just give you a headache. But hemp has really been a long cultivated plant for its very strong fibers. It has been used for fiber production and use in textile and rope for a very long time, and very widely used. It really just started to become rarer as marijuana laws started to get passed, and its cultivation became illegal with the banning of the plant. So we used to have, actually America specifically, used to have a really rigorous hemp cultivation industry where it was produced for its oils, but also mainly for its fibers. Again, that went away when it became illegal, although stupidly so, because you can't really get high off industrial hemp plants. It's starting to come back more and more again now that the laws regarding cannabis are becoming relaxed. Hemp makes for really strong and durable textiles, although it feels a bit rough. This is why it was typically used for more sort of industrial products, ropes, sails, burlap sacks like for coffee and things like this, although you can find more refined hemp fiber clothing. It does have a bit of a rough feel to it, and other than that, it resembles cotton, but it's very strong. So if you want something that's strong and durable, if you line it with something, it'll last. And it's also wicks moisture. It's quite good. All the plant fibers are quite good at wicking moisture and are cool. Spider silk. So this one's just kind of neat. The fiber source is extremely rare. It only sort of produced as a novelty, not really, never really produced in any sort of large commercial aspect. But the spiders used to make spiders produce silk to make the webs. And the silk from the golden orb weaver spider can be harvested and spun into yarn to make textiles. The process is exceedingly expensive and time consuming. So again, it has never really been done as anything more than a novelty. But it is, because it's so exceedingly expensive, time consuming, and difficult to do. And smaller textile examples exist, but this image here is the only known garment to be made solely from spider silk. That's pretty neat. You can get some better pictures of it if you want to look it up. There's some lovely articles about the process of it being done. It was made as a special project by Simon Piers and Nicholas Godley, along with some 80 other specialists that specialized in keeping and harvesting golden orb weave spiders, specialty weavers, so on and so forth. There are some other textile examples of it, but again, incredibly rare, but just neat. The next one is not really seen anymore today, although it was never common. It was much more widely seen in sort of the ancient world, and it's byssus. And it's a fiber. So byssus is a fiber made by mussel shells, those little sort of clam shells. You can eat them. They're tasty when steamed in wine and garlic. But the specific mussel species, Pinna nobilis, shown here, has a very long byssus, as shown here, and close up over here. And these fibers are quite hairy and are used by the mussel to attach it to rocks and other hard surfaces. Now, this fiber from this specific species of mussels was harvested and was used to be spun into yarn and woven. And there are some texts showing that it was, although not widely used, but used in sort of Greek and Roman times, and other ancient civilizations around the Mediterranean Sea, where the mussel calls home. It's a rather large mussel, as you can sort of see by this guy. He's standing next to it. It's really big, which makes the fibers at least a little bit easier to harvest. However, it's not used today, which is good because now this species of mussel is critically threatened. So good thing we don't use it. Let's keep it around. Why not? It's giant. It looks pretty cool. And these strong fibers from the mussel, used to, again, root it to rocks and other hard surfaces, produced a fabric that was warm and lightweight and had a shiny golden appearance. Properties very similar to silk. It had a luster, very strong and shiny. Ooh, sorry about that. And this is a glove that was knit entirely from byssus fiber circa about 1800. So you can see what it looks like in textile form. Now our last rare fiber, although again you might see this in your day-to-day, but probably not in clothing like you would bamboo. It's not really used in clothing, but it's used more for sort of ropes or doormats or rugs, is queer. The pronunciation's hard. I'm doing my best. But if you can't pronounce it, just say coconut fiber, because that's just fine. We all know how to say coconut. We all know how to say fiber. This is a rough fiber, and it's harvested from the outside of a coconut shell. And the durable, light, floatable fiber is used to make ropes or doormats, fishing nets, and other sorts of textile-y things. The rough texture of the fiber does not make it suitable for clothing, though. You're not going to find it in use for clothing. But here's the coconut. Here's a sort of mat, a doormat, used with the coconut fiber, and here's the raw fiber itself. And this concludes our world of fibers and what textiles are made out of. Just on a closing note, I probably should have opened with this in what is a textile. But from here on out, if I say cloth, fabric, it's synonymous with textiles. I'm using it synonymously with textiles, so just so you know. So I hope you learned a couple things and know a little bit more about where our fibers come from, where how our textiles are made, their sources, their raw sources for it, and I'll see you next week when we delve into the world of how we spin those fibers into yarn. Now please don't miss the assignment attached to this week's lesson, which will be a self-survey of your own wardrobe. So you'll be searching for fibers within your own home. All right, bye-bye. Be well.